Leoncio Sanchez was a towering figure in the bustling capital, a man whose influence stretched far and wide. He resided in a luxurious townhouse in the heart of the city, surrounded by the constant hum of urban life. Yet, beneath the surface of his success, Leoncio harbored a profound sense of loneliness, a truth he could never bring himself to acknowledge. His days were a whirlwind of negotiations, business trips, and high-stakes meetings, leaving him no room for introspection or self-reflection. With unwavering confidence and a steely resolve, he navigated life like a perfectly aimed arrow, always on the move, always pursuing the next target. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Admired and envied by many, Leoncio was a regular guest on television shows, his insights and strategies sought after by those eager to emulate his success. Despite his willingness to share his secrets of time management and business acumen, no one could penetrate the fortress he had built around himself or reach the heights he had attained. At 45, he was a millionaire bachelor whose aura of untouchable success kept others at a distance. One ordinary day, as Leoncio returned from a business trip to Switzerland and briefly stopped at home to change, he faced an unexpected setback. Teresa, his devoted maid who had diligently maintained his household for over 8 years, handed him her resignation. "Señor Sanchez, I am truly sorry, but my children have decided to escape the relentless noise of the city and move closer to the sea. They want me to join them. Leaving this place which I have come to love, and parting from you, whom I have grown fond of like a son, is incredibly hard. However, I have a deep longing to spoil my grandchildren, and my daughter-in-law is expecting. It is time for me to embrace this new chapter in my life." The news struck Leoncio deeply, stirring an unexpected emotional response. The departure of Teresa, a steady presence in his life, underscored the solitude that had become his constant companion, revealing the cracks in the facade of his meticulously constructed world. Leoncio merely furrowed his brow in response. It was always these family matters. In his view, family and emotional ties only complicated the meticulously ordered life he had crafted with such precision. Yes, the millionaire often seemed more machine than man, but in the ruthless arena of big business, there was no room for sentiment. One had to forge ahead relentlessly or risk losing everything. With characteristic detachment, he handed Teresa a generous severance and instructed his secretary to find a replacement, specifying that the new maid should be unmarried and childless. Sylvia, he instructed, find me someone unassuming. A woman who stays in during the evenings and isn't particularly attractive to men. Someone like that will stay for a long time. Understood, Señor Sanchez, Sylvia replied. I'll do my best. The next day, Leoncio met her replacement for the first time. She appeared exactly as he had envisioned, modest and unobtrusive. She wore a gray, slightly worn sweater and a black skirt that fell below her knees. Her chestnut hair was pulled back into a simple ponytail, and her blue eyes were hidden behind glasses. Her old-fashioned boots completed the unassuming look. She spoke softly and shyly, her fingers nervously playing with the strap of her bag. Just what I need, Sanchez thought with satisfaction. Sylvia always gets it right. Where did she find her? It feels like this girl was a museum exhibit yesterday. What's your name? He asked the new maid. Blanca, she replied quietly, her gaze averted. Excellent, he nodded, already feeling a sense of relief that his orderly life would continue undisturbed. Leonio, I want you to come in every morning, regardless of whether I'm here or not, and carry out the cleaning tasks. The bed linens need to be replaced every other day. Please make sure to dust the plants and the glassware inside the cabinets daily. At the end of your cleaning routine, put on white socks and walk through all the rooms. If the socks stay pristine, it means you've done an impeccable job and you can leave for the day. If they get dirty, please redo the floors. Do you understand? Blanca nodded meekly and whispered, "Yes, Señor Sanchez." Leonio questioned internally, "Is she really this timid, or is she just pretending? I need to test her." After Blanca left, Leonio retreated to his office. He opened both of his safes, transferring the money from one to the other. He grabbed a bundle of large bills, took out a handful, and tossed them carelessly into the empty safe. He then closed the first safe, leaving the second one slightly ajar, making it obviously noticeable. "Let's see if she's as honest as she appears," Leonio thought arrogantly, and he activated the surveillance camera. The following day, he packed his bags and left on another business trip. When he returned 2 days later, he immediately noticed a pleasant scent in the hallway. As he walked through the rooms, he found everything immaculate, no dust, no crumbs on the floor. Satisfied, he decided to take a relaxing bath. The bathroom was gleaming. On the counter, there were new shampoo, shaving cream, and toothpaste. Leonio was impressed by the maid's attentiveness. He hadn't instructed her to buy any personal hygiene products. She had simply noticed they were running low and taken the initiative. After a long, soothing bath, he enveloped himself in his cherished dark blue terry cloth robe, feeling its comforting embrace, and slipped into his cozy, plush slippers. With a sense of anticipation, he headed to his office. "I'm content so far, but let's see what the video reveals," Leoncio muttered to himself. Despite the weariness from his flight, he was a man who thrived on prompt decision-making. "If she hasn't taken anything from the safe, I'll have no further doubts about her suitability," he mused silently. He powered up the TV and displayed the room's footage, rewinding it to the crucial moment. Fast-forwarding through the recording, he settled onto the couch, his eyes fixed on the screen. The scene was mundane. The maid in her black uniform and white apron entered the office and began her cleaning routine. She meticulously organized the scattered papers and folders on the desk, mopped the floor, and dusted the bookshelves and safes. Leoncio stifled a yawn and sped through the footage to Blanca's next appearance. The same uneventful actions unfolded again, nearly lulling him to sleep. But this time, the maid moved about the room in her white socks, her expression serious and tense, which caught Sanchez's interest. Just as he was about to turn off the video, reassured that his money was untouched, something unexpected happened. Blanca re-entered the office, now dressed in her casual clothes, a gray sweater and wide dark blue jeans. She stood still in the middle of the room, seemingly in a moment of hesitation. Leoncio leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. What was she about to do? Finally, a look of resolve crossed Blanca's face. She walked over to the bookshelves and picked up a book. The millionaire stood up, straining to see better. Was she simply borrowing a book from his collection? He chuckled at the thought of her being an avid reader. His amusement turned to astonishment when he realized she wasn't holding a book, but his old photo album. Leoncio's eyes widened in disbelief. What could she possibly want with his photographs? He watched in amazement as Blanca hurriedly flipped through the pages, stopped at one, and extracted a photograph. She glanced around nervously before slipping it into her pocket. Leonio Sanchez was consumed by a searing rage. Could this girl truly be a journalist, a sneaky paparazzi who had deceitfully infiltrated his sanctuary? Her modest demeanor now seemed like a cunning disguise. With a furious growl, the millionaire turned off the video and stormed over to the bookshelf. He snatched the album, his fingers trembling with anger, and flipped through its pages with a fierce intensity. All the photos were there, except one. Leonio collapsed onto the couch, the album slipping from his hands and hitting the floor with a dull thud. He stared blankly ahead, his mind swirling with a mixture of forgotten bitterness and fresh disappointment. He had no sense of how long he sat there, motionless, enveloped in a strange trance, until the loud ticking of the clock broke the spell. He stood up, brushing aside the strands of damp hair that clung to his forehead, and left the office with a newfound calm. Tomorrow he would have Sylvia arrange a meeting with the new maid. But for now, he knew one thing: he needed to rest and regain his composure. A challenging conversation awaited him the next day. The following morning, Leonio Sanchez awoke 10 minutes before his alarm, a habit he had cultivated over the years. He rose, took a refreshing shower, and brewed a strong cup of coffee. After savoring it, he dressed meticulously and headed to his office. Sylvia, as always, greeted him in the reception area. Dressed in a striking red suit, the tall, slender blonde looked impeccable, embodying the professional image of the company. "Good morning, Mr. Sanchez," she said cheerfully. "How was your trip?" "Excellent, as always," Leonio replied briskly. "Sylvia, I need a favor." "Of course, sir. What is it?" "All the new maid. Have her come to my office. I need to speak with her." "When should I schedule it?" "The sooner, the better." "Understood, Mr. Sanchez. I'll call her right away." Leonio nodded and disappeared into his office. An hour later, there was a timid knock on his door. "Come in," he called out. Blanca entered awkwardly, her nervousness palpable as she sat across from him. Leonio Sanchez, with a stern expression and arms crossed over his chest, regarded her coldly. So he began sharply, "Confess, which newspaper do you work for?" Blanca raised her eyebrows in astonishment, her eyes wide with confusion as she looked at the millionaire. "I don't understand what you're talking about," she stammered. "But I believe you understand perfectly well," Sanchez replied in an uncompromising tone. "I saw everything. There was a camera in the office." Blanca paled, her gaze dropping to the floor. Silence filled the room, thick with tension. "You mean the photograph I took from the album?" she finally whispered. "Exactly," Leonio said, his anger barely contained. "How skillfully she pretends to be an innocent lamb," he thought to himself. Blanca looked up at him again, her blue eyes filled with a mix of fear and sincerity. "Yes, I took it, but I swear I don't work for a newspaper, and I didn't intend to publish it." There was a raw honesty in her voice that struck him. Either she's an exceptional actress, or she's telling the truth, he mused fleetingly. "Then why did you take the photograph, and why?" He paused, his voice faltering as he gathered his strength. "This one." Blanca's chin trembled, her composure on the brink of collapse. "Mr. Sanchez, I took this picture because it shows you with my mother." The words hit him like a bolt of lightning on a clear day. Leonio Sanchez felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. "What did you say?" he asked hesitantly, disbelief etched across his face. "In the photograph I took from your album, that woman is my mother," she repeated softly. "Lord, your mother?" he asked, still reeling from the shock. Could this really be happening? Blanca nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, my mother. I was too young to remember much about her, but I found out she worked for you many years ago. When I saw the photograph in your album, I needed to have it." Leonio sank back into his chair, the weight of her revelation pressing down on him. Memories he had buried long ago began to resurface, mingling with the present in a confusing whirl. "Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" he asked, his voice softer now, tinged with a newfound understanding. "I was afraid," Blanca admitted. "I didn't know how you'd react or if you'd even believe me, but I had to know more about her, about you." Leonio's anger dissipated, replaced by a complex mix of emotions. The woman he had once known, now revealed as the mother of the girl before him, had left an indelible mark on both their lives. "Let's sit down and talk," he said finally, his tone gentler. "I think we both have a lot to share." Blanca nodded, wiping away her tears as she took a seat. The room, once filled with tension, now held the promise of understanding and the beginning of a shared journey through their intertwined pasts. Blanca nodded, her expression resolute. "But how is this possible? It can't be a coincidence," Leonio questioned, his mind racing. Blanca met his gaze steadily and nodded once more. "Of course not," she replied disdainfully. "I knew from the beginning what kind of scoundrel I was dealing with by taking this job." Leonio Sanchez was stunned. He had suspected that Blanca might be more than she appeared, but he never imagined she would have the audacity to insult him so directly. "How dare you?" he erupted, struggling to regain his composure. "You stole something that belongs to me, and now you have the nerve to make such statements. How dare you?" Blanca met his anger with an icy calmness. "I took one thing from you, but you stole everything from my mother," she declared unexpectedly. Leonio felt a pang of pain in his chest. "Me? I stole?" he asked, bewildered. "Yes, you," Blanca snapped, her eyes narrowing as she lifted her chin with pride. "You betrayed her," she accused, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. Leonio's mind reeled. "What are you talking about? My mother is not capable of such things." Blanca's eyes flashed with fury. "You don't know the whole story, Mr. Sanchez. My mother worked for you years ago. She gave everything to this job, to you, but you discarded her like she was nothing. She was left with nothing because of you." Leonio's heart tightened with guilt and confusion. "Your mother. I remember her, but I never intended to hurt her. She left on her own." "She had no choice," Blanca cried, her voice breaking. "You pushed her to the edge. She had to leave, and she struggled to survive. I grew up without knowing why she was so broken." Leonio's anger melted away, replaced by a profound sorrow. "I never knew," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I never knew she suffered so much." Blanca's face softened slightly, but the pain in her eyes remained. "Now you do. And I came here to understand why, to see if you had any remorse, any regret for what you did." Leonio felt a lump form in his throat. "I do regret it. I was young, ambitious, and thoughtless. I never realized the impact of my actions." Blanca took a deep breath, steadying herself. "It's too late for apologies, Mr. Sanchez. But maybe, just maybe, you can help me find some closure." Leonio nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I will do everything I can to make amends. Please tell me what I can do to help." Blanca's expression softened further, and she nodded. "We need to talk about everything. The past, my mother, and what happened. Maybe together we can find some peace." Leonio gestured for her to sit down. "Let's begin, then. I'm ready to listen." As they sat down to talk, the weight of the past hung heavily between them, but the promise of understanding and healing loomed on the horizon. But Leonio Sanchez no longer heard her words. Memories of distant days, which he had long suppressed, trying to erase from his memory, burst free and now surged onto the man with furious force. He closed his eyes and involuntarily transported himself 22 years back. Back then, Leonio had just graduated from university and was actively searching for his first job. He came from an ordinary family with no connections to rely on. Sanchez already knew then that he should rely only on himself. He walked into company offices and personally handed his resume to the secretaries of the bosses. Lur was the assistant to the director of one of the promising firms engaged in logistics. When Leonio first looked into her blue eyes, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He was so taken with this slim, red-haired girl. The young man understood that asking for a number was too bold, but at the same time he felt that he wouldn't get another chance. So blushing and stuttering, he dared to suggest meeting her for lunch. Lur, with a condescending look, glanced at his worn-out suit but agreed. They met the next day, and Leonio took Lure to a restaurant that was clearly beyond his means. However, he felt that she deserved to dine only there, so he decisively spent his last money on fine wine and expensive dishes. But Leonio Sanchez no longer heard her words. Memories of distant days, which he had long suppressed, burst free and now surged onto the man with furious force. He closed his eyes and involuntarily transported himself back 22 years. At that time, Leonio had just graduated from university and was actively searching for his first job. Coming from an ordinary family with no connections to rely on, Sanchez knew he could only depend on himself. He walked into company offices, personally handing his resume to the secretaries of various bosses. Lure was the assistant to the director of a promising logistics firm. When Leonio first looked into her blue eyes, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The sight of this slim, red-haired girl captivated him completely. The young man understood that asking for her number was too bold, but he also knew he wouldn't get another chance. So, blushing and stuttering, he dared to suggest meeting her for lunch. With a condescending look, Lure glanced at his worn-out suit but agreed. They met the next day, and Leonio took her to a restaurant that was clearly beyond his means. However, he felt that she deserved to dine only at the best, so he decisively spent his last money on fine wine and expensive dishes. But as Leonio stood there, memories of distant days, which he had long suppressed, trying to erase from his memory, burst free and now surged onto the man with furious force. He closed his eyes and involuntarily transported himself back 22 years. Back then, Leonio had just graduated from university and was actively searching for his first job. Coming from an ordinary family with no connections to rely on, Sanchez knew he could only depend on himself. He walked into company offices, personally handing his resume to the secretaries of various bosses. Lure was the assistant to the director of a promising logistics firm. When Leonio first looked into her blue eyes, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. The sight of this slim, red-haired girl captivated him completely. The young man understood that asking for her number was too bold, but he also knew he wouldn't get another chance. So, blushing and stuttering, he dared to suggest meeting her for lunch. With a condescending look, Lure glanced at his worn-out suit but agreed. They met the next day, and Leonio took her to a restaurant that was clearly beyond his means. However, he felt that she deserved to dine only at the best, so he decisively spent his last money on fine wine and expensive dishes. Each memory was a dagger, reopening old wounds he had buried deep. The echo of her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled when she smiled, the feeling of inadequacy he felt beside her, all of it came rushing back with an overwhelming intensity. He had been so young, so desperate to impress her, to show her that he was more than just a boy with dreams. The dinner was a success, or so he thought. They continued to see each other, and for a while Leonio believed they were building something meaningful. But as the months went by, the reality of their situation became painfully clear. Lure was ambitious, and her aspirations didn't align with his struggling beginnings. She wanted stability, power, and wealth, things he couldn't provide at that time. One fateful night, after a particularly heated argument about his future, Lure left. She walked out of his life, leaving behind a note that tore his heart apart. She had found someone else, someone who could give her everything she desired. The betrayal stung, and the bitterness of that moment lingered for years, shaping the man he became. Now, facing Blanca, Leonio realized how much of that past had remained unresolved. The anger he felt wasn't just about the stolen photograph, it was about the scars Lure had left behind. He had never truly confronted those feelings, and now they were resurfacing with a vengeance. Opening his eyes, he looked at Blanca with a mixture of sorrow and determination. "I did not know your mother, not truly. I was young and foolish, and I made many mistakes. But whatever happened, I never intended to hurt anyone." Blanca's eyes softened, but the pain remained. "I came here for answers, mister. Sanchez, not just about my mother, but about the man you are." Leonio nodded, feeling a weight lifting off his chest. "Then let's find those answers together. No more secrets, no more lies, just the truth." And so the journey of healing began, not just for Blanca, but for Leonio as well. The past could not be changed, but perhaps, through understanding and honesty, they could both find some semblance of peace. Lord was impressed. It seemed she had never been to such upscale places before, just like Leonio himself. They laughed heartily later, reminiscing about the pompous rich people at neighboring tables. Their first date was followed by many more the second, third, fourth, as Leonio and Lord relished each other's company. They had endless topics to discuss, and often found themselves completing each other's sentences. Gradually, Leonio realized that he couldn't imagine his life without Lur and decided to introduce her to his parents. Leonio was very nervous, but his anxiety turned out to be unfounded. The family dinner went perfectly. The atmosphere was warm and pleasant. His parents looked at Lur with admiring glances, and Leonio felt a surge of pride and joy. That evening, he confessed his love to her for the first time. They stood on the veranda. The night was warm, and the stars sparkled above them. Leonio felt that there was no one happier in the world than he was. They held hands tightly. He leaned towards her ear and whispered, "I want you to be my wife." Lur laughed and whispered back, "But you haven't met my family yet. What if you change your mind?" Leonio shook his head firmly. "Not a chance." They kissed under the stars for a long time before his parents called them in to taste his mom's famous chocolate cake. The next weekend, Lur invited Leonio to her house. "Now it's my turn to introduce you to my parents," she declared. Leonio was nervous again, even more so than the first time. He spent a long time choosing a shirt, ironing it meticulously, though it still seemed wrinkled to him. Finally, he got ready and left the house. Lur's parents lived a few blocks away, so he decided to walk. On the way, he bought flowers and chocolate for Lur, her mother, and her younger sister. He struggled to remember her sister's name, but in conversations, Lur always called her little sister Dragonfly. Just outside the house, her name finally came to him, Federica. Lur had mentioned once that her younger sister was named after their grandfather. Leonio knocked on the door, and it swung open, revealing a red-haired girl who looked about 14. "Hi, Federica," he said cheerfully. "I'm Leonio, your sister's friend." He expected the girl to smile, but she only furrowed her brow and muttered something incomprehensible before disappearing. Shrugging, Leonio entered the spacious corridor. Lur's family was well off. They lived in a large mansion with plenty of room for everyone. Moments later, Lur descended the stairs in a lovely red dress with a deep neckline and a beautiful pearl necklace. Her hair was pinned up at the back, adorned with a shiny hairpin. "Oh, I see Dragonfly has let you in already," she exclaimed joyfully upon seeing him. "Yes," and then promptly vanished, he admitted with a laugh. "That's her style," Lur laughed, taking the flowers and chocolates from him. "Let's go to the living room. Our parents are already waiting for us there." Leonio followed her into the living room, where her parents greeted him warmly. The room was elegantly decorated, reflecting their refined taste. The conversation flowed smoothly, and soon any nervousness he had felt dissipated. Lur's parents were charming and welcoming, making him feel like part of the family. As the evening progressed, he couldn't help but notice the loving glances exchanged between Lur and her parents. It was clear that they were a close-knit family, full of warmth and affection. After dinner, they sat in the cozy living room, enjoying coffee and dessert. Leonio felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that he had found a second home. The warmth of the room, the laughter, and the genuine connection he felt with Lur and her family filled him with a profound sense of contentment. He realized that this was what he had always dreamed of: a loving family. a place where he truly belonged. As the night drew to a close, Leonio walked Lur to the door. They stood on the porch, the moonlight casting a gentle glow on them. "Thank you for tonight," he said softly. "Your family is wonderful." "They liked you," Lur replied, her eyes twinkling. "I knew they would." Leonio smiled, feeling a deep sense of happiness. "I love you, Lur," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I love you too, Leonio," she whispered back, and they kissed under the stars once more, sealing their bond with a promise of forever. Leoncio took a deep breath and followed the girl. Lord's parents turned out to be very nice people and excellent conversationalists. They asked Leonio about his work, and he willingly shared the latest news. He had managed to get a job at a good company that dealt with investments. "We're so happy for you," Leonio Lord's mom said. "Our daughter said you were looking for quite some time, and unfortunately her company rejected your application." "Yes, that's true, but I'm not upset about it. The Lord's company has given me a treasure that turned out to be much more valuable than any of their positions," Leonio replied, smiling gently at his girlfriend. She smiled back at him. Federica, however, grimaced at the sight. She hastily stuffed everything on her plate into her mouth and, without thanking anyone, went to her room. "Federica clearly doesn't like me," Leonio whispered to Lur. She just waved her hand in response. "Don't pay attention to her, darling. She's always like that." Leoncio wanted to believe her, but something told him that Lur was wrong. Apart from Federica's provocative behavior, the evening was a great success. When Leonio kissed Lur goodbye and left the house, he felt great. The worry of the past few days had receded, and he was happy that the challenging moments were behind him. Now, he could calmly propose to Lur and prepare for the wedding. With his new job, he could afford a larger apartment where they both would feel cozy and comfortable. With these optimistic thoughts, Leoncio returned home, took a shower, and peacefully fell asleep. Everything was turning out just as he had planned. Even better, an old university friend who had become a real estate agent found him a beautiful apartment in the city center, overlooking a beautiful park. Leonio went to see it alone. He wanted to surprise Lur. He walked through the bright rooms, trying to imagine Lur's reaction, and it seemed to him that he couldn't find anything better. The apartment seemed to be made for the two of them. Without any further doubt, Leoncio made the deposit. Then he went downtown to buy a ring for Lur. He pondered over options for a long time until he settled on a delicate and very elegant ring adorned with a pale blue topaz, just like the color of her eyes, he thought. He bought the ring on credit, intending to pay for it with his next paycheck. Now it's just left to propose to Lord. Leoncio carefully considered the details for a long time. He wanted everything to be very beautiful and romantic. While walking through the center, he noticed a small but cozy restaurant where a violinist was playing. He entered and ordered a cup of coffee. The waiter brought Leoncio his order, and the young man sat for a long time listening to the musician. Dreams took him somewhere far away. He imagined walking through life hand in hand with Lord and how she would become his only destiny. They would have children, then grandchildren, and they would spend their old age in a little house by the lake, somewhere outside the city. Leoncio even shed a tear. He envisioned it all so vividly. Then he got up, paid for the coffee, and firmly decided to return here with Lur and propose to her to the beautiful sounds of the violin. It happened the following week, and everything went perfectly. Lur suspected nothing. She was more beautiful than ever. Her pink dress accentuated her fragility and tenderness. She curled and let her hair loose, and they cascaded in beautiful waves down her shoulders and back. Leoncio felt like everyone around was only looking at Lur, and he felt proud that this girl would soon be his wife. Leoncio felt like the luckiest and happiest person on earth. He was beside a beautiful woman, and things at work were going better than ever. It was like a fairy tale. When the violinist played one of the most poignant and tender melodies, Leoncio got down on one knee and proposed to Lure. She couldn't hold back her tears. Everyone around applauded. "Will you marry me?" Leoncio asked, looking at her with eyes shining with anticipation of happiness. "Yes," the girl replied. "Yes, I will." The guests applauded the beautiful couple once again. Leoncio lifted Lure up and twirled her around to the beautiful sounds of the violin. When they sat down at the table, a gray-haired man with long mustaches approached them. He wore an old-fashioned checkered jacket and trousers with pleats. "You're a very beautiful couple, and I'm a retired photographer," he said softly. "It sounds strange, but it happens. I got so tired of photographing endless and monotonous weddings that 5 years ago, I swore I wouldn't take another photo. But you've inspired me. There's so much love emanating from you. So allow me to take just one photo." Lure smiled and nodded. Leoncio sat next to her and hugged his beloved, and the man took their picture. A couple of days later, he sent a copy of the photo to Sanchez's office. Leoncio carefully tucked it into his planner to show Lure later. The wedding was scheduled for the end of April. There was just over a month left to prepare. However, life intervened in the lovers' perfect plans. One morning, Leoncio came to work and saw a note from his boss asking him to come to his office. Surprised and somewhat nervous, Sanchez immediately went to the chief's office. On the way, he pondered why the boss needed to see him. He really hoped he wouldn't be fired for some unknown reason. After all, the wedding was just around the corner and moving to a new apartment. Losing his job now would be unthinkable. However, Leoncio's fears were unfounded. He immediately noticed that the boss was in a good mood. He greeted him warmly with a friendly smile. "I have news for you," Sanchez said, the boss, "and I hope you'll be as pleased with it as I am." Leoncio smiled. "I certainly hope so too." The boss gestured to the chair opposite him, and the young man sat down. "The thing is," continued the boss, "we're opening our first overseas branch." "Oh, congratulations," Leoncio said sincerely. "I wonder what I have to do with this," he thought to himself. "And you have a direct role to play in this," said the boss, as if reading his thoughts. Miss Sanchez was surprised. "You excelled at university. Your diploma speaks for itself. You have excellent reviews from your professors. You've also proven yourself to be a young but very promising specialist here. We need people like you. That's why I've decided to appoint you as the manager of the branch that is about to open in." He didn't manage to finish his sentence because the agitated Leoncio interrupted him. "I'm very flattered, sir, but does this mean I'll have to relocate?" The boss raised an eyebrow. "Is that a problem for you?" Leoncio hesitated for a few minutes before responding. "The thing is, sir, I'm getting married soon." "How soon?" the boss asked, scrutinizing the young man. "In a month." The boss cleared his throat and adjusted the already perfectly arranged papers on the table. "I'm sorry, Leoncio, but this is a very important step for the company. I didn't just choose you randomly. I believe you have a great future ahead. If you lead our branch, you'll be on a path that many aspire to, but not everyone gets such a chance. Consider yourself very lucky." Leoncio nervously adjusted his tie as if it were choking him. "But what about the wedding?" "Invitations have already been sent out. Postpone it for a short while. You'll go, settle in, then come back, have your wedding, and take your wife with you. It's simple." Leoncio still had doubts. "Tell me, what's bothering you?" the boss began to lose patience. Leoncio looked him in the eye. "I'm very worried that Lure." "What about Lure?" "Can't you wait?" the boss smirked sarcastically. Sanchez nodded awkwardly. The boss stood up and began to pace nervously around the room. What kind of love is it if the girl can't wait a couple of months? And why do you need such a wife? Leonio understood that the boss's words were more than fair, but something inside him clenched at the thought of postponing the wedding and leaving Lur here. Or do you want to be handpicked? The boss continued. Your fate is at stake right now, not just yours, but your entire future family's. Doesn't you want to live decently and for your children not to need anything? Remember my words, you'll be a millionaire in no time. Do you want to miss such an opportunity? The boss's arguments sounded more than convincing, and Leoncio reluctantly agreed. Back in his office, he could barely wait for the end of the workday. In the evening, he and Lur agreed to have dinner together. He bought a bouquet of crimson roses and hurried to the restaurant, which was a few blocks away from the office. He arrived first. Lord had written that she would be a little late. Leonio sat at the table and rehearsed the speech he was going to say to his beloved for the 100th time. He had never been so nervous before, and his heart ached and didn't want to go anywhere. Finally, Lur appeared. She was wearing a striking dark blue dress with an open neckline. A silver bracelet sparkled beautifully on her wrist. She had swept her hair to one side and wore long silver earrings. All the men turned to look at her as she walked to the table where Leoncio was waiting for her. How can I leave her alone and go, he thought jealously as he rose. Sorry, dear. Got stuck in traffic, Lura chirped, hugging him. He handed her the bouquet. So beautiful. Thank you, darling, the girl smiled. Leoncio helped her sit, then sat himself and cleared his throat. He knew he was about to ruin Lur's mood, but he couldn't hold it in any longer. I need to tell you something, he said with a voice unfamiliar to him, trembling with nerves. Lur instantly sensed his state, and the smile faded from her face. What happened? The girl asked, concerned. Leoncio recounted the details of his conversation with his boss, carefully observing his beloved's reaction. Lur paled but quickly composed herself. Of course, I'm upset that we'll have to postpone the wedding, but career prospects are very important for you, for us, and our future, your family. Your boss is right. Leonio couldn't believe his ears. He knew Lur was sensible and rational, but he didn't expect her to accept this news so quickly and without much emotion. What if she doesn't love me at all, he briefly thought, but he quickly pushed away his doubts. Thank you, my love, he said. I'm so glad you understand the importance of what's happening. Did you think I would make a scene over a couple of months' delay? Lur laughed. Leoncio laughed too, feeling surprisingly relieved. Yes, that's exactly what I thought. And I also don't have the money to pay for all the dishes you broke in this restaurant. The rest of the evening went perfectly, and the next day, Leonio began to prepare for his trip. Their meetings with Lur became even more tender. Both felt that the separation was approaching with each passing hour. On the day before his departure, Lur came to Leoncio. They sat on the couch and turned on some movie, but both were too distracted to follow the plot. Leonio breathed in the scent of Lur's perfume, wanting to memorize every detail. The girl held on to her beloved tightly. Around midnight, Leonio said he would call a taxi, but Lur shook her head. Tonight, I want to stay with you. Leonio's heart jumped in his chest. Are you sure? I thought you wanted to wait until the wedding. Lur nodded decisively. Yes, I'm sure. Tonight I want to be with you. Early in the morning, Lur left. Leoncio asked her not to see him off at the airport. He knew saying goodbye there would be even harder. He didn't want to leave her crying among a crowd of strangers. As they said goodbye at the doorstep, both couldn't hold back their tears. I'll write as soon as I land, Leonio whispered. Lur nodded. I'll be waiting, she said. I love you. I love you too, and I already miss you." When Leoncio closed the door, he suddenly felt very scared. For a moment, he thought they might never see each other again. He wanted to rush out of the apartment and chase after the girl, but he restrained himself. That would look more than foolish. They had already decided everything. He didn't know that Lur was also standing behind the door, pressing her hands to her chest, but hesitating to knock. The new country greeted Leoncio more than warmly. Everyone treated him with respect, which amazed the young man. He himself felt very young and inexperienced. At first, it was difficult for him to adapt to the new life, but gradually, the young man began to get used to it, and it became easier for him to fulfill his obligations. Every day, he called and wrote messages to Lur. Time flew by quickly, and the lovers eagerly awaited their meeting. Leoncio had already bought the ticket. They only had to wait 2 more weeks. That evening, Leoncio called Lur as usual, but her phone was switched off. Strange, he thought, that had never happened before. The young man called back an hour later, but the result was the same. He called Lur all evening, but she remained unreachable. The next day, a message came: "Forgive me, Leoncio. I met another man and fell in love with him." The young man almost dropped the phone. His hands trembled so much. He quickly dialed Lur's number again, but she didn't pick up. "Don't call me anymore," she wrote a minute later. Leoncio barely restrained himself from smashing the phone against the wall. How could she, after all the words she said to him? And he, like a fool, was waiting for their meeting, and she just betrayed him. Leoncio threw himself on the bed and, unable to hold back, burst into tears. By evening, he had a fever. He called the office and said he wouldn't be able to come to work tomorrow. He slept through the entire next day. The fever subsided, but Leoncio couldn't get up and make himself do anything. He just wanted to forget. Fortunately, the next day was Saturday, and he didn't have to go to the office. Leoncio spent the whole day lying in bed again. He hardly ate anything. On Sunday, he got into the car provided by the company and drove out of town. He wandered through the surrounding fields for a long time, trying not to think about anything, but he couldn't erase Lur's image from his memory. The girl stood before his mental eyes as if alive. However much Leoncio tried, he couldn't help but feel love for her. "I must let her go," he said aloud. "She chose someone else." Returning home, Sanchez returned the ticket, took a bath, and shaved, determined to start a new life without Lur. He blocked her number to stop checking incoming calls and messages every minute. On Monday, the young man went to work, and the familiar life once again swept him into the whirlpool of events. Leoncio tried not to remember the past and not to think about the future. All he had left was the present, and he was ready to act and make the most of everything it could offer him. He succeeded in everything he undertook, and with each success, he reached higher peaks. Eventually, Leoncio Sanchez left the company that had opened up so many opportunities for him, returned to his homeland, and started his own business. Luck favored him in everything. His business brought in more and more money, and one day, Leoncio became one of the most successful and wealthy people in the country. "So, what do you think my mother did?" Sanchez heard the question, which seemed to carry an Arctic chill. He blinked, pushing away the memories, and focused on Blanca's face. She looked at him hostilely. Leoncio's heart ached at the sight of her icy demeanor. He took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "Blanca, I don't know what happened. I only know my side of the story. I was hurt and confused by what I believed was a betrayal." Blanca's eyes narrowed. "You think my mother betrayed you?" Leoncio hesitated, then nodded slowly. "At the time, yes. I believed she had chosen someone else over me. It broke me. But now, hearing what you said, I realized there must have been some misunderstanding or manipulation." Blanca's hostility wavered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. So you think someone else was involved? Someone who didn't want you two together? Leoncio sighed, rubbing his temples. It's possible. I've been thinking about it ever since you mentioned your mother's diary. There are too many unanswered questions. Blanca's gaze softened slightly. Do you really think my mother loved you? Leoncio met her eyes, his voice filled with emotion. Yes, I do, and I loved her deeply. Losing her was the hardest thing I've ever faced. Blanca looked down, her hostility fading. I believe you, she said quietly. I want to find out the truth too. Leoncio felt a glimmer of hope. Then let's do it together. We'll find out what really happened. Blanca nodded, a tentative smile on her lips. Yes, let's. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension between them easing. For the first time, they felt a connection, a shared purpose. The journey to uncover the past wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to face it together. And as they began to plan their next steps, both father and daughter felt a sense of optimism, believing that the truth would finally bring them the closure and understanding they had long sought. She found someone else 2 weeks before the wedding. Isn't that enough? He said angrily. The blank expression on her face ignited as she looked at the millionaire in astonishment. What are you talking about? She stammered, bewildered. Leoncio stood up from the table and turned away to the window. Long forgotten feelings of resentment, powerlessness, and despair surged back into him with renewed force. So, she kept this from me, the man bitterly uttered. Blanca remained silent, casting her eyes down. She no longer felt hatred towards the millionaire. Something about the man's posture and the tone of his voice made her reconsider her opinion of him. I don't know anything about it, but I'm sure it's a mistake, Lur whispered. After all, I was already pregnant with Blanca 2 weeks before your departure. Leoncio felt like he had misheard. He turned to the girl, staring at her incredulously. What? But that can't be. Blanca bit her lip, tears welling up in her eyes. My mother told me that you spent the night together before you left. That's how I came into existence, she said softly. Leoncio nervously ran his hand through his hair and sat down. He closed his eyes, pain contorting his features. Is it true? He asked without lifting his gaze. Just don't lie to me, please. I know what people are capable of for money. He looked at Blanca. She was as pale as a sheet. I know you don't believe me, she murmured, but I want to get to the bottom of this myself. I always dreamed of seeing my father, of feeling what it's like to be a beloved daughter. I've always been deprived of that. My mother said my father died, but one day I found her diary and learned everything. Leoncio's heart ached as he listened. He felt the weight of all the years of misunderstanding and lost time. He reached out, gently taking Blanca's hands in his own. Blanca, I want to believe you. I need to understand the truth. If what you're saying is real, then I've missed out on your entire life, and that is something I can't bear. Blanca's tears spilled over, her voice trembling. I've lived my whole life with a hole in my heart, wondering who my father was, why he wasn't there. When I found my mother's diary, I learned that you were alive and that you didn't abandon us willingly. Leoncio felt a surge of determination. We need to talk to your mother, get her side of the story. There has to be more to this than we know. Lur nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. Yes, we need to clear this up once and for all. The three of them sat in tense silence for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Leoncio knew that this was a pivotal moment, not just for him, but for Blanca and Lur as well. It was a chance to uncover the truth and to start healing the wounds of the past. Blanca, Leoncio said gently, I promise you, I will do everything I can to make up for lost time. If you are my daughter, I want to be a part of your life from now on. Blanca looked up at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "I want that too," she whispered. "I want to know what it's like to have a father." Leonio squeezed her hands reassuringly. "We'll get through this together. No more lies, no more misunderstandings, just the truth." Lur wiped away her tears and took a deep breath. "Let's go talk to your mother," she said, her voice steady. "It's time to get the answers we all need." With a sense of resolve, they stood up together, ready to face the past and uncover the truth that had been hidden for so long. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, they had hoped that the future could be different, that they could build a new beginning on a foundation of truth and love. Leoncio looked at Blanca, unsure whether to believe her or not, but his heart squeezed in response to her words. He no longer saw her as a brazen hypocrite. No, there was something in her eyes that made her seem fragile and vulnerable. He wanted to embrace her like his own daughter, to stroke her hair for a long time, soothing her worries and instilling confidence in her for tomorrow. "I think only one person can give us the right answer. It's Lur," the man finally said decisively. "But she doesn't know I'm here," the girl said, frightened. "I got a job with you without her knowledge. She doesn't think highly of you. I've heard her say many times that you're a coward and a scoundrel when she saw you on TV." Leoncio flared up. "So that's what Lur thinks of me," he bitterly thought to himself. Then he stood up decisively and, circling the table, extended his hand to Blanca. "Let's go, señorita. We need to resolve this as quickly as possible. Your mother will have to give us an answer." They left the office, descended in the elevator, and got into an expensive car driven by an elderly chauffeur. "Where to, mister?" Sanchez, he asked. Leoncio nodded at Blanca. The girl gave the address, and the car set off. On the way, Leoncio and Blanca remained silent. Finally, the car stopped in front of a rather affluent house. The man and the girl got out of the car. "Is Lur home?" Leoncio asked anxiously. "Yes, she's working remotely," Blanca replied. Leoncio hesitated. Perhaps it's worth warning her not to catch her off guard, but Blanca shook her head. "No, let's just do it now, so she has no way to retreat." Sanchez nervously swallowed. Blanca took out a key from her purse and opened the door. They entered the bright hallway. "Mom, it's me," Blanca called out. "Is everything okay?" Leoncio heard a painfully familiar voice coming from somewhere very close. He suppressed the urge to rush into the adjacent room and embrace Lur. "Yes, but I'm not alone. I have a guest with me, and he wants to see you," Blanca declared. "Who is it?" the woman replied, and Leonio heard the sound of a chair being pushed back. In a moment, Lur appeared at the threshold. She was wearing an elegant dark green dress and a white cardigan. Her hair was shorter than in her youth, but still the same shade of red. It cascaded in voluminous waves over her shoulders. Lur's gaze remained unchanged. Leonio once again saw the same blue, mischievous eyes of the young woman he still couldn't forget. However, when Lur realized who stood before her, shock flickered in her eyes. She anxiously covered her mouth with her hand. "Hello, Lur," Leonio murmured softly. His hands trembled. His heart pounded desperately in his chest. "What are you doing here?" Lur asked harshly, finally regaining her composure. She crossed her arms and looked at the man with hostility and coldness. "I came to find out the truth," Leonio admitted. "What truth are you interested in?" Lur retorted. At that moment, Blanca intervened in the conversation. "Mom, are we just going to stand in the doorway? Let's go into the room." Lur shifted her gaze to Blanca, and her facial expression softened slightly. She silently turned and headed into the living room, with Leonio following her and Blanca bringing up the rear. As everyone sat down, there was a palpable tension in the room. Sensing it, Blanca decided she was unnecessary here. As soon as the girl left, Leonio couldn't hold back and spoke as if all those years hadn't passed. "Why are you angry with me? It was you, not me, who didn't answer my calls and then wrote that you met someone else and fell in love." Lur raised her eyebrows in astonishment. "What? I never wrote that," she exclaimed. "I was pregnant and waiting for you to tell you about it in person, not over the phone, and you just disappeared and blocked my number." Leonio's eyes widened in shock. "What? No, that's not true. I never blocked your number. I tried calling you every day, but I never got through. Then I received a letter, supposedly from you, saying you had moved on." Lur shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I never sent such a letter. I thought you had abandoned me. I was devastated." Leonio felt a wave of guilt wash over him. "Lur, I had no idea. I thought you left me for someone else. I was heartbroken. I never stopped loving you." Lur's tears flowed freely now. "I never stopped loving you either, Leonio. I waited for you, hoping you would come back." Leonio reached out and took her hands in his. "I am so sorry, Lur. I never meant to hurt you. If I had known you were pregnant, I would have done everything to be with you." Lur squeezed his hands tightly. "It's not too late, Leonio. We can start over. For Blanca's sake and for us." Leonio nodded, his heart swelling with hope. "Yes, let's start over. I want to be there for you and Blanca. I want to make things right." They sat there, holding hands, the years of pain and misunderstanding slowly beginning to dissolve. They had a long journey ahead, but for the first time in over 2 decades, they had a chance to rebuild what had been lost. And in that moment, under the soft glow of the living room lights, they both dared to dream of a future filled with love, forgiveness, and the promise of a new beginning. "Are you saying I made it all up?" Leoncio replied in the same tone. Lur looked at him with confusion. Then her eyes clouded over for a moment, as if she was trying to remember something. "Wait, before that happened, I lost my phone. I was sure it was on my nightstand, but it wasn't there. The next day I found it under my pillow. It was very strange. I never put it there. But I was so glad to find it that I didn't think much of it. I thought I'd see a bunch of missed calls and messages from you, but the phone was empty. So I called myself, only to hear that my number was blocked. I sat on the bed, feeling out of sorts when my sister walked into the room. She asked me how I was doing, and I complained that I couldn't reach you on the phone. He probably found someone else." Federica shrugged indifferently and left the room with these words. Lur helplessly shrugged her shoulders and cast her gaze down. "And you believed her?" Leoncio guessed. "Federica never liked me from the start. She probably didn't want us to get married. I wouldn't be surprised if I found out she took your phone and wrote those messages." Lur flared up but couldn't retort. "She's always been a rebel, and yes, she was against the wedding. She was jealous of me being with you," the woman confessed and suddenly burst into tears. Leonio trembled, his voice breaking. "What's wrong with you?" He wanted to hold Lur close and never let go. "Federica ran away from home when she turned 18. We don't know where she is, if she's alive. Our parents nearly went mad with worry. It undermined their health." "I'm so sorry," Leonio whispered. He hesitantly stood up and approached her. He sat down on the couch next to her and gently hugged her, fearing she might push him away. But Lur leaned into him and cried even harder. They sat embraced until she calmed down. "So Blanca is my daughter?" Leonio dared to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Lur nodded. "I'm sorry it all turned out this way," Sanchez said bitterly. "I'm sorry I didn't see her being born and growing up." He lowered his head, feeling the pain of emptiness and loss. Lur gently ran her hand through his hair. "But you're here now. Yes, you can't change the past, but you have the present. Now that Blanca has found you, she needs you more than ever. The millionaire lifted his head decisively. And I'll be there. Then he looked at Lur with tenderness. And you, do you need me? Lur smiled and nodded. Yes, I do. I never could forget you, Leonio Sanchez. Hearing this, Leonio felt like the luckiest person on earth. He held tight to the only woman he ever loved and, for the first time in 22 years, allowed himself to dream of a beautiful future. And now, he was sure his dreams were destined to come true. The millionaire decided to test the new maid by leaving the safe open and turning on the camera, which led to a series of surprising revelations and deep emotional confrontations. As we've seen, misunderstandings and lost communication can lead to years of pain and heartache. Leonio Sanchez and Blanca are now on a journey to uncover the truth and heal the wounds of the past. What have you learned from this story? We'd love to hear from you. Please comment below with one thing you've learned and will bring into practice in your own life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more compelling stories and life lessons. Thank you for watching.